Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be beginning this after the break section with Alyssa Paparella, who will be speaking a little bit about disabled in STEM. So, Alyssa, whenever you're ready to begin, you may begin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Alyssa Paparella. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white female. I have brown hair and a curly ponytail to the side on my right side over my shoulder, and I'm wearing a black shirt with some white stars on it. Today, I'm going to be presenting about being disabled in STEM, inclusive and accessible science communication. My slide is currently on a light purple background, and the text on it also has my Twitter handles, which is at disabled in STEM and at Alyssa Paparella on Twitter. And I also have the SciAccess logo. So before delving into why you should listen to me, I thought it'd be good to introduce myself and why I'm here speaking to you today. So on the right side of this slide, I have a picture of myself. So in this picture, I have my brown and blonde hair cascading down my shoulders, and I have a floral print shirt on that has pinks and purples and whites. So my name is, once again, Alyssa Paparella. I'm currently a second year PhD student at Baylor College of Medicine in the Cancer and Cell Biology program. I graduated from Sarah Lawrence College in 2019. I also took part in UC Davis's PrEP program offered through the NIH from 2019 to 2020, and this is specifically for underrepresented minorities in STEM, including people with disabilities. I'm currently a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program recipient. I serve on Disability In's Advisory Council, and I'm an executive team member of Disabled in Higher Ed. So part one, now I have, once again, that purple light background, and part one says Disabled in STEM as a platform for accessible science communication. So I created the platform called Disabled in STEM in March 2020, and it became sort of my pandemic project. I had a bit more time on my hands, so I wanted to make use of that time and do something that would benefit the community and myself. So the goal was to spark conversations and share my experiences. At the time, I had acceptances from graduate schools, but I really struggled to know what program to go into or how to really exist as a disabled individual in STEM. So I thought by creating this community, it might bring people together and be able to share experiences and create more representation. Additionally, through this platform, I also host interviews for a blog that I have at disabledInSTEM.wordpress.com. So the reason I did this was because I really wanted people to share their true lived experiences of being disabled in STEM and able to share any resources or tools that they found helpful throughout their experiences. And I also run a mentoring program through this. On the right here, I have a picture of a global map, and on it are red dots of showing where people had visited my platform. So predominantly, these red dots are found within America, but there's also some concentrated in Europe and some splattered around, such as Australia, Japan, China, Dominican Republic, Peru. And on the left side of my screen, I have a screenshot of my Twitter that says Disabled in STEM. It has my handle that says at Disabled STEM, and it says, we are here to affirm that you do belong in STEM. This is a safe space for people with disabilities in STEM to connect. Contact, and it has my email, disabledinstem@gmail.com. Additionally, it has my WordPress website, which is disabledInSTEM.wordpress.com, and says that I had joined and made this account on March 2020. Additionally, it says I have 1,711 following, and I have 5,402 followers. So now delving a bit more into the mentorship program. So as we all know, mentorship is vital to an individual's success. When it comes terms for somebody mentoring for somebody with a disability, I don't know, but I'm willing to help you can go really far. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in the disability community, but you must be willing to be an active ally. So it's okay to make mistakes, but you must be willing to learn from them and take the advice and feedback from disabled individuals in order to improve your mentoring skills. So I started this program through my Disabled in STEM platform last year, and I had 45 mentor-mentee matches. It's currently in the second year of launching, and I'm also launching a non-STEM program with disabled in higher ed, because we all know as disabled individuals, it is important to have mentorship. And of course, I'm in STEM, so that was my focus, but I'd like to expand and make sure that everybody feels like they're able to get the mentorship in order to succeed for whatever career they decide. My computer froze. Sorry, y'all. Jump it ahead. Okay, so part 2. Now we have that purple light screen background again, and we're talking about accessible social media practices for science communication. So some basic terms that you need to know. So screen readers, these are assistive technology for the blind or those who have low vision or those who are both deaf and blind. This converts context, so text, alt text, transcriptions into speech or braille. The next point I have is alt text. Alt text is a written description of an image, graphic, GIF, or similar that screen reading tools use to describe images to visually impaired readers. The third point is camel case. This is when the first letter of each word in a hashtag or website, etc., is capitalized. And the fourth point that I have is an image description, which is a detailed explanation of an image that provides a more complete information of what is actually being shown. So here I have an example of alt text image descriptions to understand what is the difference. So on the left, there is a logo, and this is the logo for disabled in higher ed. So the alt text, an example would be disabled in higher ed logo. But is that really telling your audience much? If they're not familiar with the logo ahead of time, they're not actually understanding it. So this is where image descriptions come into play. So the image description for this image would be disabled in higher ed, logo of a white mortar graduation cap, outlined in gray with the words disabled in higher ed floating above. As we can tell from this example, an image description is much more descriptive and actually gives your audience an understanding of what is actually happening in the image. So some basic terms that you need to know, part 2 now. So communication access real-time translation, better known as CART. This converts spoken word into instant text in real time for events and requires a trained professional. The second point is about captions. Captions are on-screen text descriptions that includes words spoken and other relevant sounds, such as a doorbell ringing, and it identifies the speaker. The third point is subtitles. Subtitles present audio information in text for videos or other visual media. Unlike captions, subtitles are only the words spoken. And the fourth point are transcripts, which are unsynchronized text descriptions of content that can be presented via Google Doc or a downloadable text/Word file. So about some accessible science communication. I primarily use Twitter, so I'm using that as my basis to describe some accessible science communication practices. So as we talked about, alt text is super important for all images, so you want to make sure that you're including that. In order to see if you're not using a screen reader, if an image does have alt text, what you could use is a Twitter bot, and it's called @ImageAltText. So anytime that you see an image posted on Twitter, you could use this @ImageAltText in order to call this bot, and it will tell you if there's alt text or not for this image. So this is a great way to be an ally to the community, and you're able to actually assess, are these images accessible? And if not, you could give this person who had posted it a little gentle reminder that alt text makes everything more accessible. So this is especially important when it comes to recruitment. Often we see a lot of images posted for job recruitment, but they tend not to be accessible. So this is saying that individuals that use screen readers are not receiving the same information. So it's important to be an ally, and if you could, make people aware of using alt text. Another example of accessible science communication is the camel case hashtags, which, as we talked about, is the capitalization of each new word. So a screen reader is able to pick up each word rather than reading it all as one. So an example of that is disabled in STEM, which is a hashtag I use a lot. So the proper way to do it is to capitalize the D for disabled, the I for in, and the S for STEM. Otherwise, disabled in STEM would just be read as one long word, and that's not as accessible. So we need to capitalize each word. And often when we have these hashtags, whether it's Black and Neuro, disabled in STEM, the I is not capitalized. So we need to be a little more cognizant of that. Another example is captioning your videos. So you could use closed captioning, which are subtitles and anything heard within video. So if you're trying to struggle and figure out how to caption your videos, you can upload your video to YouTube and they will provide some captions, but it is very important as scientists that use particular vernacular that they may not recognize. It's important to edit your own captioning and make sure it's exactly what you want it to be. So if you see on Twitter that someone posted a video and it doesn't have captions, there's this bot called @HeadlinerClip. And what you are able to do is you're able to use this bot and say caption, and it'll take a few minutes, but it'll go through and provide those automatic captions for what the video is. Of course, this is not the best because it may not be very good for science vernacular, but it's one way to ensure at least a little more accessibility, but we should always aim to be more thorough in the beginning and make sure that we edit our captions originally prior to posting any videos. My computer froze again. So here I have a picture of a cat. This was a cat I actually found on my doorstep last weekend. It is a calico cat, and I'm having an example here of how to add alt text on Twitter. So I went under the what's happening, which is usually where you would write what your tweet is, and I added the image of the cat that I wanted to post. So under that, then it gives you the ability to tag people or add description. You click add description, and then you get 1,000 characters to describe what is actually happening in that image. And you want to make sure you hit save prior to posting to make sure that it is saved. But 1,000 characters is actually pretty generous in terms of social media. Other platforms tend to restrict, so 1,000 characters gives you a lot to be able to truly describe what is happening in the image. So after you hit save, then you could post your image. And then if you want to ensure that it did work, you could always use that bot that we talked about, the @AltImage text, and it'll tell you if there actually is the alt text as described. And if not, the best practice is if it didn't work, to delete that image and repost it accessibly. So here's some just social media tips in general. You want to think about contrast and legibility of fonts and graphics. You want to use plain language. As scientists, I think this is a really big one for us because we tend to be very, very specific in our own fields and disciplines. But we want to remember when we're doing science communication and trying to reach a wider audience, they may not have that background or knowledge that we do. So we want to use accessible language to try and make the content as relatable and understandable for our audience. Additionally, we want to use alt image descriptions as required. We also want to consider our subtitles and closed captionings for videos. If there's a longer video, it's best to link a transcript so people could also follow along during it. As we talked about, we want to use camel case hashtags. So this is, once again, the capitalization of each new word in a hashtag. So here we have hashtag accessibility matters, where we have the A for accessibility capitalized and the M for matters. We don't want to have it all lowercase in just one word. You also want to use shorter links if possible, and this could be done by 2 examples of tinyURL or bit.ly. So being an ally to the disability community, you want to ensure that your science communication or SciComm is accessible. This is a continuous process. It's not just a linear path. There's not some boxes that you check off and you're like, now I'm an accessible science communicator. This is something you need to continuously learn as this changes and progresses over time. So being aware of this and making sure that you're cognizant of every once in a while, hey, I want to make sure that my content is accessible. I want to improve my own knowledge of this. You also want to encourage others to make science communication content accessible. So others may not be aware of it, and that's great as an ally where you can step in and make a difference for the disability community and raise awareness about the issue. So as we talked about, you could see if content is accessible. So this is like actually seeing if there's alt text for images. And if there's not, you can offer a gentle reminder and say, hey, alt text is really important. You could even provide a link. Twitter, I know, has a link where they tell people how to add alt text. You could even provide this so people then could learn about it or ask questions if needed. Another important thing is really to promote disabled voices, and especially those who are part of other minorities. So disability is diverse in itself, and people who are part of other minority groups tend to have a compounded effect where ableism on top of other isms such as racism or sexism could be really difficult. So these voices are really important that we highlight and that they're able to get the recognition and share their experiences. So this tends to be an issue within the disability community is because the disability community tends to be very whitewashed. So we want to promote more diverse voices within the disability community. So also on this slide, I found this wonderful art from Redbubble by Ember Roar. They have this amazing art and it says, don't stand by, be an ally. So it's a Black background and it has white text. In the word be, it has the Black Lives Matter fist. In the word and, it has somebody in a wheelchair. And the word ally has the LGBTQA plus colors. So I thought this was a great way to show some interdisciplinary connection between these different identities and that you could be an ally for multiple identities and advocate for them. So some key takeaways. Accessibility is a learned skill that takes some time and practice. You can't automatically be great at it, so learning to implement one little thing at a time will make a difference in your science communication. You must be willing to learn and continuously improve. So be open to feedback. You must also be committed to accessibility in all of your science communication. So this goes for if you're posting on Instagram, you should also have captions on your Instagram. If you're doing this on TikTok, you should strive to make all of your science communication accessible across any platform. I think the most important takeaway from this also is you must be willing to accept feedback from members of the community and learn from mistakes to improve for the future. Nobody comes and automatically knows how to do everything right, but you must be willing, if someone tells you that you've done something that's inaccessible or harmful to the community, you must be willing to take the moment and step back and say, I'm sorry, how can I improve? I think learning to improve and learning from our mistakes is the most important thing in order to be a more effective and accessible science communicator. And with that, I just have some acknowledgements. I wanted to thank SciAccess for the opportunity to speak today. I also wanted to thank all of my past mentors who have shaped me into who I am today and the scientist I am. I also want to thank the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship for providing my funding. And I want to thank all of you for your attendance and attention today. It was great being able to speak and talk to you. So with that, if anybody has any questions, feel free to post and I'll be happy to take some questions and see if I can provide some answers. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Alyssa. We do actually have one question immediately, asking for a clarification regarding the difference between image description and alt text.
So alt text tends to be your bare minimum. So for an example, I don't know if my computer will cooperate to go back. Okay, here we go. So your alt text example tends to be where it would just say, this is a logo of something, where your image description would be a bit more in depth and actually describe what is happening in the image. So this would be a great example where here they delve a little bit further into describing what the logo actually is rather than just saying this is the logo. I think it's also important, image descriptions tend to change dependent on what you're trying to highlight. So this is a more straightforward example I chose just for some bare basics. But when there's more of an image where you have a foreground and a background and some shadows, it's important to understand what you're highlighting in an image description. And two people's image descriptions may not match because it's depending on what you're trying to highlight in that example. So somebody may focus, on the nature background of a scenery, where somebody else may focus on the actual people that are there. So it's important to figure out what you're trying to highlight and make sure you focus on that, but also briefly describe what else is happening in the image. Hope that helped.
Yes. There is a follow-up question asking, shouldn't the image description be the alt text?
I think, yes, that tends to be, but from a basic accessibility standpoint, alt text is the more basic bare minimum, where image description is you're able to delve a bit further. So image description is also inclusive of alt text.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification.
Yeah.
We have another question from Luke asking, thank you, Alyssa. This was a fantastic presentation. Is there a website where I can read more about this? Or a guide doc of some sort if one exists?
I think it's definitely a hard thing with the community is that there tends to be a lot of different resources on accessibility, but there's not one centralized document. The only thing that comes to mind that I could think of is Autistic Troya created a document of language that's accessible for the disability community, and it tends to talk about that. In terms of learning about accessibility practices, the way that I've done it is kind of just consulting a bunch of different resources. So a great way to continue to learn about this stuff is to use the word universal design. So universal design is the principle that everything should be designed accessibly for everyone, and it shouldn't be an accommodation process that somebody has to ask for, but we should just build in, for example, our captions, our subtitles, our alt text, and that this increases accessibility for everyone, and not just the disability community, but also, for example, people who don't have English as their first language. So if they're learning, having those captions also benefits them because they're able to follow along and actually understand. So we should all strive for universal design.
And that's such an important topic. We have quite a few different presentations today that center around this topic of universal design. Okay, we do have one hand raised for a audio question. So I'm going to allow to talk. Argyros, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but you are now allowed to talk if you would like to ask your question.
Hello. First of all, thanks for the nice presentation and congratulations for this effort.
Oh, thanks.
So the question is, I'm also visually impaired and working in STEM, doing my PhD. So how could I participate to this network? For example, I guess I could mentor some undergraduate students.
Yeah, sure. I could go a bit more into that. So through my platform on Twitter, I've been advertising for both mentees and mentors. For my program, I don't require that anybody has a certain degree level or anything. It is a volunteer program, so I know it's a bit of a lot to ask the disability community, who tends to already have a higher tax when it comes to everything else. But it is a volunteer program. We match a mentee and a mentor for about a year, so they're able to interact. We try to do it based on the mentee's preference. So this could be whether it's field or discipline, or this could also be disability. So I could post on my Twitter, repost the links for the mentee and mentor application if you're interested.
Yes.
Yes, thanks so much. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Okay. We do have one more question. Sorry, the chat moved and I lost it entirely. One moment.
I feel that. It's stressful and you're like, where's everything on my screen?
Yes. Oh, this is actually just a comment regarding, again, the conversation of difference between image description and alt text, where someone clarifies their experience with the alt text versus image descriptions, and how alt text is accessed only by screen readers, so it's usually not visible.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it depends on the platform too that you're using, because for the example on Twitter, it says image description, but it's also only accessible for people who have screen readers to see that alt text. So tends to be people who are not aware in the community. They tend to be used interchangeably too, which is another important point to recognize. I think the main takeaway is no matter what you call it, just be as accessible as possible and describe everything that's happening in the image so everyone could benefit from.
Yes, more important than specific
terminology.
Yeah, vernacular is the accessibility.
Yep.
Okay, so that is all of our questions for now. So we do have a few extra minutes here. So Alyssa, I will allow you to have last word on your presentation if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about.
This isn't really part of my presentation, but I also thought it was important to bring up the point of accessible lab tools. So I started a series, I guess I would call, on my website where I talk about accessible lab tools. And I've just started with lab tools that have been accessible for me and things that I use. So I have 3 images here. So the first tool is a label maker. The second tool is a tube opener. And the third tool is an electronic pipette. So I give a bit of a description about what these things are and the pictures of them. But I think it's also important to just bring up that accessible lab tools tend to be an underfunded source in STEM, and that it's really great to talk about these resources. If anybody has any they recommend, I would love to make an image of them and raise more awareness, because as somebody who's disabled in STEM, it tends to be a process where you're just going through yourself and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. But a lot of it is there's just not an awareness or knowledge of what is out there. So that's kind of why I started this series. And I'm sure, as most of us are in STEM, it could be a great way for other people to share their experiences and what they find accessible.
I can imagine that can be extremely helpful to non-disabled scientists as well. I've spoken to some of my colleagues who have worked in labs who have described like cramping in their hands or actual long-term tremors or things like that, just from constantly pipetting things. So those sort of things like electronic pipettes seem to be something that's could benefit everyone, not just
disabled. It definitely could be. And I think that's a great way that like people could look at it, and when they're presenting it to their PI or principal investigator of, hey, this is accessible for everybody. And then you're also making room for not just the one disabled person when they do come to your lab and then need to suffer in order to get this accommodation, but you're having this in place and saying, hey, this is accessible for everyone. We're thinking about the disability community, whether someone's there or not. Yeah. It also takes the pressure off of the disabled individual from having to continuously advocate. And we know that's always a tough process in itself.
Absolutely.